Lagos. Yes, of course. We're turning our attention today to the United States of America, and you obviously know why. From executive orders to certain statements to Elon Musk in Government House, of course, with his son. And of course, Elon Musk also at federal agencies sending people home. Many have lost jobs. And then, of course, for the opponents of Donald Trump, returning rapid fire on these executive orders, they're all turning to the courts. It looks like the courts are going to be having a whole lot on their desks. I'm talking about the courts in the United States, because every executive order, if not all of them, are being repealed somewhere in the courts in the United States. But hey, I'm not an authority when it comes to talking about geopolitics or, international relations. And that's why my guest is here today. I haven't seen him in a few months, but this is the first time we're talking this year. Professor Scott Lucas is a professor of U.S. and international politics. He is of the Clinton Institute and University College Dublin. Scott, it's so good to see you. My eyes are not sore, so I can't say you're a sight for sore eyes, but you are, you're looking like 2025 is off to a great start for you.
Well, if you could send us some sunshine. I'm sitting here sitting here under the grey skies of Wicklow in Ireland, and we don't know if we're going to see the sun again. No, it's such a pleasure to be back here with you and with all your great listeners.
Great, lovely. Don't worry, I'm going to send you some sunshine after the show. But let's start by looking at the storm that's been created in the United States with Donald Trump and his executive orders and all of the things that he said. But I want to quickly pivot to Palestine and Israel with the visit of Benjamin Netanyahu and that statement he made about, the fact that, Palestine can be made, it could be turned into some real good estate. And when someone asked him who was going to live in the place when they finish building it, he said, well, world people of the world. I'm guessing not Palestinians. But when you first heard that statement, what came to your mind, and what do you think he meant by, nobody can live in Palestine because it's a rubble, it's a whole pile of rubble?
You don't know what was on my want to know what was on my mind, because if I told you, it would get your program shut down immediately. It's hard to keep this lighthearted. Just to replay it for your folks in Nigeria, who I'm sure are all queuing up to buy beachfront property in Gaza, in Trump Tower, Rafah, or Trump Tower, Gaza City. Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel had come to the White House at a very, very sensitive time, because we're in the middle of the 6-week phase 1 of the ceasefire. Mm-hmm. Now, we're talking about almost 50,000 Gazans who have been killed in the past 16 months. That follows almost 1,200 Israelis that were killed by Hamas's attack. We're talking about 1.9 million Gazans, almost 2 million, 90% of the population who have lost their homes, who are displaced, who effectively are trapped with insufficient water, insufficient food, with insufficient shelter. You know all this. Mm-hmm. And the big question, which I'm going to get back to, is, are we going to get a phase 2 of the ceasefire at the start of March, which means more hostages get returned back to Israel, more Palestinian detainees get returned to Gaza, but importantly, there's no military attacks. So at this sensitive time, Trump, with Netanyahu beside him, reels off this statement. And it was a statement. It was not just a thought bubble, because he read it, which said, that Gaza is destroyed, and the best thing for these Gazans is they can go live in wonderful places elsewhere. And he would talk about Jordan. He would talk about Egypt in particular. And I think Saudi Arabia has been mentioned as well. Mm-hmm. Now, this surprised Netanyahu, and it surprised some of Trump's staff, but in fact, it was not a surprise. And I need to say this because some of the media are a bit negligent. It's like, oh, he's thinking outside the box to get a diplomatic settlement. He's just trying something on to break the logjam. No, what had happened is that Trump was acting like a businessman. And there's a couple of important if you have the time for it, a couple of important background statements here. During Trump's first term, he was negotiating with North Korea, and he wanted to see Kim Jong-un. And, now they were friends. They were best buddies. They weren't enemies. Trump kept saying in the middle of those negotiations, North Korea has some fabulous, beautiful beaches where we can have hotels and condominiums. And he was quite serious about it, that he thought he could get the settlement with North Korea and open up the economy where he could invest in resort areas. Well, good luck with that. More seriously, in March of 2024, almost a year ago, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has business interests in the Middle East, he has them in the Gulf War, he has them in his Gulf world, he has them in Israel. He said on camera at Harvard University, Gaza has prime waterfront property. Then in the summer of last year, when Trump is campaigning for president, his staff asked a professor named Joseph Peltzman, he's at George Washington University, what can we do to redevelop Gaza? And Peltzman gives them a plan, which he later published, which says, well, you have to start from scratch. You remove everything. You remove the rubble, and of course, you remove the people. So when Trump said the people of the world can come in and live in those condominiums and stay in those hotels, he meant it. He was serious. And this reflected months of discussions and probably years of the idea of Gaza's not for Gazans. Gaza is there to turn a profit.
Immediately when that story went live, of course, we saw the responses from Jordan. Yep. We saw the responses from Saudi Arabia. But most importantly, the fears that some Israelis had, and I'm talking about the ones who are not extreme as Netanyahu, were having, was that they were afraid that these hostages that they had in the hands of Hamas were not going to be released. And now we see Hamas saying, well, we don't even care anymore. You know what? We're not releasing. We're going to pace ourselves. Do you think that this is as a result of, the statement that was made by Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, Hamas, without directly saying so, was agitated by the statement. But they're, I think, more agitated. There's not going to be a phase 2 of the ceasefire. I'll explain why in a minute. So they did say that in response to Israel not living up to the terms of phase 1. For example, not all the humanitarian aid is getting in that's supposed to get in. There have been Israeli attacks, they would say on specific targets, but there have been Israeli attacks on Gaza. Hamas said, well, you're not living up to your side of the bargain. So for about 2-3 days, they said, okay, we may not release the hostages this weekend. Now, they have changed the statement. I mean, they said yesterday and today, no, we will release the hostages. They've confirmed that. So phase 1 proceeds. The problem here is that it was always going to be very difficult to get phase 2 and to stop the war, because when Benjamin Netanyahu was being asked to go into phase 1, he was caught between the families of the Israeli hostages that were being held. At that point, there were about 94. Now there's still about 70 to 75. And they just want this to end. They just want to see their loved ones. Then you had his hard right ministers who were threatening to bring the government down if he actually agreed to phase 1. One is still inside the cabinet. He's the finance minister, Mr. Smotrich. One is outside the cabinet now, Mr. Ben-Gvir, but saying we'll support the government if there is no phase 2. Now, Netanyahu is caught between these two groups. What has happened is that Netanyahu can now say to Israelis, well, look, Donald Trump thinks we need to go to war against Hamas again. We need to get rid of the Gazans. That way he placates his hard right. He tries to keep the families of the relatives at bay, but it means the ceasefire stops. And that was why, as angry as I was that Donald Trump was advocating ethnic cleansing, and that is precisely what he was advocating, I was even angrier in the near future that I knew that at that point that we would get no resolution of phase 2, where you have to get Israel to agree to withdraw its forces, and you have to agree on a government for Palestine. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get agreement on those two issues. So when did the bombs start falling again?
because there are a lot of people who are advocating that this might not necessarily be the case. Of course, I'm talking about where you mentioned ethnic cleansing. I mean, because the foxes of this world do not report it. I mean, they see it as normal. Even the British media is not necessarily, reporting it as ethnic cleansing per se. They're being a little soft on it. But there are those for the likes of LBC who's calling it what it is. That look, this is a call for ethnic cleansing, because how do you tell people to leave what they know as their home to become refugees in other countries? But what does this say about the American foreign policy? Because we're going to come back into talking about what's happening in the federal government of the United States, but how does this place America? Don't forget, America is having problems with South Africa right now. They're saying that, we want to give all the lands back to people. And South Africa has responded. They're having to piggyback on what they said to China, to Canada, and several other places. And even China is trying to say, well, okay, tax for tax. If you're going to, place tariff on our things, we'll do the same thing on your things. How do you think the world is perceiving the new foreign policy of the United States?
I mean, it can vary from places around the world. There are a few supporters of American foreign policy. One of them today is Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader, because Donald Trump has effectively sold out Ukraine to Russia's invasion. But I think most people, and I'm not talking about leaders here, I'm talking about like you, me, everybody else, I think we're confused at the speed at which it's all happening. I think we're frustrated that this country that has so many of the world's resources, that is so rich, that has done good things in the past. It has a mixed record. We know that it has been. That here, the leader, the president, is clearly doing really bad, awful things with no regard for humanity. I think we're angry. And I think sometimes, although I don't feel this way, because I cannot let myself feel this way, we feel powerless. We feel like we can't do anything about it. What I would say is, let me go into being an analysis to giving us a starting point for how we empower ourselves and understand what it's doing and so on. And that is, this is not American foreign policy. That might sound strange. This is not the foreign policy of an American system, which is being undermined as we speak. This is the foreign policy of Donald Trump in his inner circle. And it is a foreign policy which has one priority. That priority is not allies. It's not friends. It's not adversaries. It's not Nigeria. It's not Africa. It's not Europe. It's certainly not the United Nations. It is Donald Trump. In other words, there's a cruder way I could phrase it. Again, I won't do it because we're on here. Donald Trump wants everyone to bow down and kiss his backside. The term that people will use for it is transactional politics, right? What it means in practice is that Trump doesn't go in and think of everybody cooperating in a win-win situation. He thinks of this as being a win-lose situation. So if we are going to talk about the tariffs in a minute, what he's trying to do is he's coming and playing the bully, saying, I can win over Canada or China or Mexico, and they're going to give us money. Now, that's not actually what tariffs do. Tariffs are actually a tax on American consumers, but he doesn't understand that. And here's another thing I must tell you, and you listeners, I need them to understand this because people will gloss this over. Donald Trump is street smart. He's a vicious street fighter. He is not smart about issues. He does not know basic things. He certainly knows very little about Africa, which you and I could discuss at any point. And so that means that when it comes to tariffs, he's just operating on, I think, American can get money. When he's talking about South Africa, which you mentioned, and this is a case that has not been covered enough. It came, it went because of the speed. Some of Trump's people are upset that South Africa leads the case against Israel in the International Court of Justice, the genocide case. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump's unelected co-president is Elon Musk, who is from South Africa.
Originally South African, yes.
Originally South African, whose father is a supporter of apartheid in South Africa, whose father is a supporter of those white farmers who have supposedly been the real victims in South Africa. So those sanctions on South Africa were Donald Trump playing the bully, saying, I'm going to get you. I don't like what you did. And it means that any country at any point could be targeted. He has announced that in 90 minutes' time, just over 90 minutes, he's going to announce more tariffs. We don't know on whom. We don't know on what sectors. He has just decided that countries are ripping America off, and he's going to come in and get some money. So it means that America in the past, there were always rules of the game with America. Now, they broke those rules. And you and I know they broke those rules on a lot of occasions. But there were rules of the game that I could analyze what they're doing. There are no rules of the game now except what Donald Trump's ego wants. That's the only rule.
I have 2 minutes before I go on a quick break, but I want to push this question further. There are those who are saying about what Elon is doing with the federal government agencies, with USAID, with him saying that, he's trying to save the government some monies. There are those who are saying that what the Donald Trump administration is doing is breaking those institutions that used to have some sort of power. And I'm not just talking about the US, I'm talking about the American system as it is, because normally in America, you have strong institutions. The courts have powers, as opposed to what we have here in Africa, where we have strong men. There are those who are criticizing Donald Trump and saying what he's trying to do now is to break the power of these institutions, so they're no longer able to stand. Do you perceive that?
We're going to need to continue it after the break, but let me give you the teaser for this. For how many years you had the idea that many Americans wanted Africa to be like America? Donald Trump wants his America to be like those parts of Africa you just mentioned. He wants America to be led by a strong man or a couple of strong men with no effective institutions to check their power. The thing about this is, this wasn't just a case of Elon Musk, who is also a narcissist, who also wants unlimited power coming in. This was actually open. We could have seen this in something that I'll describe to you after the break called Project 2025, which was a 900-page document by Trumpists who said, when we get back into power, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to deal with the agencies. We're going to fire a lot of people. We're going to remove job protections, and we're going to make them do what we want them to do.
Wow. Well, in case you're just joining us, this is Global Review. I still have Professor Scott Lucas here. We're breaking down Trump policies and what this means to the rest of the world, especially for Americans living in the United States. We'll be right back after these messages. We're still talking. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube, Nigeria Info FM. So if you want to be part of the conversation, join us live. We'll be right back after these messages.
Here's to 30 years of creating delicious memories and many more to come.
Hello, Mrs. Martins.
Yes. Oh, Mrs. Johnson, how may I help you?
Junior's body temperature is high and he's complaining about headaches and body aches.
Not to worry. Get Bruston and suspension.
Okay, ma. I'll call you back.
Bruston and Suspension for Children is a sweet-tasting brand of ibuprofen which provides relief against toothache, pains, and fever in children after 30 minutes.
Hello, ma. Oh, Junior, stop that.
Is everything okay, Miss Johnson?
Yes, ma. Junior is fine now. In fact, Junior, sorry, ma. I'll call you back.
Brustin and Suspension for Children. Always take the product after meal. If symptoms persist after 2 days, consult your doctor. A quality product from Rambaxay.
The average Lagosian is always running, whether running for health, for business, running towards goals, or even running late. Race against time. At the end, we are all united in our race towards various goals. Keep running. Join the Access Bank Lagos City Marathon on the 15th of February 2025 and stay connected with Airtel, the official telco partner. Airtel, a reason to imagine.
I'm in love, Sonia tomato mix, stand up. Easy to open, easy to squeeze, easy to scoop and easy to store. Dishes come alive with so much taste. Sonia tomato mix, of course. Sonia tomato mix, yes sir. Sonia tomato mix, stand up household.
Sonia tomato mix in a new stand-up pouch. 0 *3 hash, or just go to the website at www.oneplay.ng. Oneplay.ng. Go to www.oneplay.ng, and of course, it will cost you 500 naira per ticket to play this game. You can play as many as 10 times. You can play as little as once. In a few seconds, however, your ticket will be in the draws. Now, the more tickets you purchase, the higher your chances of winning big. Now, Val Mega Jackpot. Whether you play via the website at www.oneplay.ng or you go by way of the USSD code, your chances of winning are pretty much the same. Now, remember to play responsibly, and note that this game is only suitable for people who are above the age of 18. One Play is a registered trademark under Lasher Trading Services Limited, licensed by the Lagos State Lotteries and Gaming Commission. We are legit, so start playing and start winning.
99.3 Nigeria Info.
Your number one station for talk. Let's talk.
Lagos, are you ready for another magical experience of Live Your Life? Please join us for another Lagos edition tagged Different Shades of Love with our founder and life coach, Pastor Dr. Lovett Inyo Awan, featuring impartation, talk show, question and answer, mentoring, games, prizes, and lots more. Date is Saturday, 22nd of February 2025. Time is 12 p.m. Venue is City Heights Hotel, 6 Sheraton Link Road off Okpebi, Ikeja, Lagos. There's a raffle ticket for cash prizes for the first 100 attendees, and this event is absolutely free. To attend, please register at lovetInYourAwan.org/live-your-life-2. Okay, so that's Loveth, spelled LOVETIYON-live-your-life-2. Okay, for inquiry and sponsorships, you can call the number 0706 282 3452 0706 282 3452. You can kindly follow them on all social media handles at Lovett Inyo Awan for more info. That is Lovett Inyo Awan on all social media platforms for more info.
This is Hard Facts.
Yes, it is Global Review still, and we've been talking with Professor Scott Lucas, looking at Trump's policies, how it's affecting America and the world at large. Now, before we went on that break, we were talking about strong institutions, or the institutions in the United States right now, and how they're suffering. I mean, if it is considered suffer, under the policies of Donald Trump. And Scott, you said you were going to expatiate on it when we came back from the break. Yeah.
So the context for this is that people who'd been around Trump in his first term, and of course he was voted out in 2020, they thought, we really didn't succeed in what we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
We really wanted to implement a lot of radical policies, economic, social policies, foreign policies. We blame this on the agencies keeping us from doing this, right? And so they created these terms like saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion are bad. Now, I always thought diversity was a good thing. I always thought equity was a good thing, but DEI is bad. And apparently the U.S. agencies are woke and part of the deep state. They created all these terms, but what it came down to is they wanted agencies that would simply do Trump's will. And so what has happened is you match up that vision in Project 2025 to Elon Musk and his approach. And just in case your listeners don't know what happened, as soon as Trump came into office, teams of men, usually between 19 and 26 years old, with no security clearance, with no qualifications in the agencies they were going into, they went in and they effectively stole the records. These guys are software coders, they're computer coders, and they just copied everything. And we're talking about, for example, the first place we went was the Treasury, which controls trillions of dollars in payments. It pays healthcare payments, it pays school payments. It pays contractors to do work. They just gathered up all that information with no regard for security. Then they went to the Small Business Administration. They went to the Department of Energy, Department of Education. They are even now threatening to do it with the Pentagon, with censorship. Now, information is power. And so what Musk and his people are doing is they are spreading some of this information as now disinformation. They're turning it around. They're aiming at certain people, saying that they're bad people, and they're aiming at certain agencies. The first one, and this was to be the test case from Project 2025, was the U.S. Agency for International Development. And if you have just a moment to explain how reality gets turned into this fiction to break the agencies, USAID spends about $43 billion a year. Now, a lot of those projects, and some of them are in Africa, they are, for example, healthcare projects, for example, HIV/AIDS projects. They're projects in terms of other infectious diseases to try to contain them or even eradicate them. There are projects for water supplies, projects for community development, projects for democracy promotion, projects to support independent journalists. I could go on and on and on. Now, in every bureaucracy project, money will get overspent. That's what happens. But by and large, these are good projects. Musk and his people came out and said they created complete falsehoods. For example, that $50 million was spent on condoms for Gaza, as if we were giving this to those bad Palestinians, right? The idea that they were having transgender operas, as if transgender people were bad, but somehow that entire operas were being created for them. And there are all kinds of these wild stories that just simply weren't true.
But he was questioned, I think, a few days ago, if not 2 days ago, while he was in office with Trump on that day, as to why he spread that information, which was wrong, because I think a press man tried to correct him that they fact checked it, and it was that these condoms were sent to Mozambique because of the HIV status of that country. And guess what Elon said? He said, well, I mean, he might not always be totally correct, but, it is what it is. That's basically what he said, But then I think the reporter pushed further to say, so what happens to how many plus million people who follow you and have digested that information as if it were true? I mean, he had no response whatsoever.
And there is no response, because what this is, and I know this will be a provocative comparison, all you have to do is go back to the 1930s and Manager Joseph Goebbels, who flat out said, if you tell the big lie often enough, people will believe it, right? Until it gets to the point where it affects them personally, they'll believe it. Now, at the point when the lie affects them personally, then you got to bring in the power of the state to kind of repress them. And let's hope it doesn't get to that point in America. But right now, Musk is spinning all these tales and stealing this information, and that's accompanied by the threats. So thousands of people have already been fired from the government under the pretext of cutting waste. And if you believe that's what Musk is doing, I got some prime property on the coast here in Ireland to sell you, okay? If you think that's what he's doing.
Yeah.
But on that pretext, they fire thousands of people. They are trying to coerce many others to resign. I mean, one of the first things they did was send out an email to every government employee saying, would you like to resign? We'll pay you through September, wink, wink. Trust us on that. And all you have to do is reply with one word, resign, on an email. Now, that's not a legal contract. That doesn't guarantee your pension. It doesn't guarantee your rights. But that was what they tried to do. At the same time that they were trying to get masses of people to resign, and that they were firing, for example, the heads of, agencies. The big thing they did that the press didn't appreciate and still don't appreciate is every American agency has what's called an inspector general. Now, the inspector general is to make sure that, like, for example, that funds are not misspent, that there's not corrupt practices going on, that procedures are followed. First thing Trump and Musk did is they fired 18 of those inspector generals. And ask yourself why. What they did is they removed the legal process for oversight of these agencies so they could come in and claim to be the overseers. The effect of this, because we could go on and on stories, and again, I told you a little bit about USAID. People are dying because of the USAID cutoff already.
Yeah.
people are not receiving health care because USAID programs are shut down. Refugees are not getting shelter because the programs have been shut down. You're talking about health care payments that were not being processed in the US because at one point they tried to stop every grant and loan in the US. US scientists cannot cooperate now with international colleagues because you can't use the words like climate change on government websites.
I have no more time. I have just 5 minutes, and I want to open up the phone lines for people to join the conversation. So Lagos, I have just 5 minutes. If you want to comment on this issue, just go ahead, join the conversation. 0201 465 7190. Is Elon going to become very powerful, overly dangerous, or is he trying sincerely to help the United States? Who knows? But I want to hear your thoughts. You can join the conversation. We're live on Facebook and on YouTube. Professor Scott Lucas here with us talking about the situation right now under the Trump administration. But talking about climate change while we're waiting to get to the phone lines, he said he signed an executive order, Trump now, I'm talking about Trump, saying we're returning the plastic, straws. He said something, and I heard him, that the papers explode. I don't know what that means. But the paper straws, they're useless and they explode. And I'm wondering to myself, where does that leave the rest of the world who's trying to race against time to deal with the issue of climate change?
Look, when I heard that, I thought, was it the fact that he had a young son during his first term in office, Barron? Did Barron not like paper straws? Is that what happened? Did Melania have some type of but the serious point about this, remember that Trump had said other things like, for example, that, we have to get rid of wind power because it kills all the birds, that it would be better if American warships ran on steam, right? You go back to that. What we have to do is, and this is going to be true of many issues, but it's on climate change, is we have to work with each other despite Trump. And regrettably, despite American expertise, you cannot count on American expertise being part of this conversation in the near future. And so we have two options. We either accept that the world almost literally goes to hell because of climate change. We all simply burn it up. We compete to try to fire up more coal than the other person, or is we work with other countries to try to contain this. Which leads to a wider point, because we talk about this. The country that benefits from this type of jackassery, I just made that word up. The country that benefits from this is China, because China is portraying itself, even though it's the number 2 contributor to the gases, greenhouse gases.
Emissions, yeah.
The emissions, they're portraying themselves as the adults in the room. We're the ones that can work with you on this, and they're going to go to various countries, including in Africa, and say, look, we have the responsible projects that can help your country plus help climate change. And the Americans don't have a leg to stand on against it now, because they've been outmaneuvered.
Wow. I really wish we could go on and have this conversation, but because of time, I have just 2 minutes. I want to read some messages and maybe take one quick call, and then we'll wrap this up. But this is, I'm sensing, Scott, that you and I are going to be back here very soon to have a conversation similar to what we're having right now. But let's take a quick call. Hello. Welcome to Hard Facts. Hello. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. Do call me back if that was you. Let me just read some WhatsApp messages here that are coming in on this particular issue. Someone says, Elon Musk will be too powerful for America. Most of Trump's policies are vendetta. And this is from Ayo. Thank you very much, Ayo, for your message. Someone says, I'm a Trump supporter and I love what Trump is doing. Please, no one should bother my beloved Trump. When Biden and the Democrats were doing their own madness, none of you guys were criticizing Trump today, or those of you who were criticizing Trump today had nothing to say. All of you were supporting Biden, and now it's Trump's turn. They now remember criticism. We don't care. Without Trump, corruption in USAID wouldn't have been discovered. Go Trump, go. And this is from Peter. Scott, Apparently, you obviously are a Trump hater. In closing, you've got 20 seconds. In closing.
So, yeah, I mean, Peter, thank you. But if you ever want to check out what I said about Joe Biden as well, trust me, I said some pretty choice things about him, especially on the issue of Gaza. Look, this isn't a Trump or a Biden thing. This isn't a Democrat or Republican thing. It's not left versus right. It's a question of us all living together and living decently. And to live together and live decently, we have to cooperate. We have to check our individual egos at the door. And we have to look not at what we would like to be true. You might want to like Donald Trump. That's fair enough. You have to look at the facts. And I want a planet which is responsible, where we have our homes, where we have our schools, and where we don't simply feed one man's ego and leave everything else to go to hell.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you. Scott Lucas is a professor of U.S. and international politics. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Scott.
It's a pleasure. All you great folks out there, give each other a hug, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Okay?
All right. See you soon.
Hi, Erica.
Jimmy, I learned that Betano is sending 3 football fans to England to watch the big game of Aston Villa versus Tottenham for free. Imagine us going there.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.